morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to our Let's Talk Dairy podcast again. And we're joined this morning from the Grass10 team by John Douglas. John, you have been out and about over the last week and you're watching things happen on the ground. So maybe give us our usual little summary of where we are and what we need to be doing.
Yeah, George, is perfect. We've had an absolutely brilliant February. We probably had the best February ever for grazing. PBI farms are showing over 30% of the farm grazed. And, on heavy farms, they might be slightly later calving, but they've got through a lot more area than normal as well. And grass utilization around the country has been very high as well during the last few weeks. And as dry matters are high and graze outs are good, which is training animals for the year ahead and also setting up good quality swards for the year ahead. So we can see here pasture-based data is showing we're about 784 of an average farm cover, a bit behind where we'd like it. And the growth is behind demand. So demand is up at 24 kilos, growth is at 10. So we have to be very careful. So while it's been very good and we've got a lot of benefits in February, we have to be careful going forward. The attention now should be turned for the next couple of weeks. 1 in 3 pasture-based farms, George, are living on the edge at the minute. Their average farm covers are below 700. And with the growth versus demand we can see in pasture-based, that can very quickly drop by 100 or 150 a week, very, very quickly. So farmers need to be walking the farm weekly from now onwards to hold average farm cover above or around 600 kilos of dry matter per hectare until early April. And now you might be at that stage yet on your farm. Maybe the farm covers are still heavier. That might be a case for you even in a week's time. You might have to start doing that or 10 days time, but that will be the key as ground conditions remain good and animals are out grazing for longer. So we have to be very careful of not dropping the farm cover too low. Growth will probably slow down a little bit. Colder weather is on the way, but dry matters and utilization are good. We're looking at grazing about 2% of the farm per day. That's to reach the 65% grazed by St. Patrick's Day, George. So we're still on our normal spring rotation. We just need to keep a focus on average farm cover. So we're going to just match the demand to the grass growth. So the grass growth is 10 or the grass growth is 15. We set the demand at that figure, and that's how we hold average farm cover.
Okay, I have an old principle that you should be tight at the beginning of April if you're farming, but it looks like everyone's going to be farming this year, is it, John?
Yeah, everyone's tight to early March nearly, or not everyone, but a lot of people are tight early March, George. So we have to hold that for a month.
Oh my God.
Look, the summary is great February. Keep the average farm cover right, and get slurry out on grazed ground, get some fertilizer out up to date, and keep grass on the farm until the start of the second rotation.
John, listen, thanks very much for that brief update there, and it's all pretty positive this week, ladies and gentlemen, which is what we like to see.
Brilliant.
Okay, John, thank you. Okay, now I'm joined by Denis Brassil. Denis, for his sins, is a Kerry man, but we won't hold that against him. And
Thanks,
what's worse, he's actually working as an advisor down in Kerry. Where are you farming? Where are you advising, Denis? What part of Kerry are you advising in?
Yeah, so I advise in the Castle Island area, George. So I'm based in the Tralee office here in Kerry, and I cover the Castle Island area. So kind of a 8-9 mile radius around Castle Island covers the vast majority of my area.
Okay. So how would you describe the land type over that country? Is it real good, or is it mixed, or what's it like?
Sure, everything's good in Kerry, George. Yeah, so look, we would describe ourselves as being a high rainfall area. We have a mix of land, so we have limestone land underneath by and large down the valleys, and then as you go up into the higher ground, we have pencil type soils, which are quite shallow, but because they're high up and we're southwest and we get a lot of rainfall, they can get wet quick. So spring and autumn have different kind of management to what maybe the normal advice would be, and then we have high clay content in our soils as well, George. So that makes things sticky. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So look at rainfall. You were saying high rainfall. What kind of millimeters are you talking about, Dennis?
14 to 1500 mils, George, depending on where exactly you are in the area. Yeah.
Okay, and like everything else in Kerry has his own twist on it to do things slightly differently. So what we'll do now is we'll move in and talk a bit about the calving patterns down in Kerry till we hear what's going on down there.
Yeah. So you're laughing at me, George. So yeah, we do things a little bit differently, George. So because in a normal year, we get a lot of rainfall, high rainfall, right? So our calving patterns are slightly different, and this predates me in Kerry, so it's not my fault, and it's guys really being smart about how they match calving pattern to being able to access grass, right?
Yeah,
So a lot of my guys won't start calving until the 8th of March or the 8th of February, sorry.
yeah,
And I have guys who calve from the 15th of February. Now, look, with the way breeding has gone and with short gestation bulls and high EBI, they will all have calves on the ground 5-6 days before their
yeah.
start date.
Okay.
Um, but the plan, like all these farmers will say to me, George, it's not about when I start; it's about how compact I do it. So these guys are still
Yeah.
aiming to have a median calving date of late February, the last week of February. So that's
Okay.
a lot of pressure, a lot of cows calving down in a short space of time.
Okay. Okay. So a lot goes on in Kerry in the second half of February. Is what you're telling me.
Yeah, it's
All
easy to
your,
talk to easy to talk to guys today. They don't want to spend too long on the phone.
I bet you don't. All your clients then, Dennis, are spring calving, are they? Any winter milk people down there?
I have a few, George. Yeah, they would be more guys who are supplying Lee Strand as opposed to supplying Kerry.
Yeah, but majority were Kerry people.
Yeah,
Kerry
vast
is
majority
supplied
would
as
be
well.
Kerry
Okay.
and Spring Cavan.
So look at you've had a brilliant spring. Grass is starting to be grazed off at this stage. How is composition going? Or I see you were telling me milk yield you mightn't be sure milk yield because you only fresh
Yeah, it's
calves.
very hard to get a handle on milk
Mm.
yield given that there's probably 6-7 cows being added to the tank every day.
Yeah,
So like we were just talking about it earlier before we came on. I looked at some of the groups yesterday. I had a group yesterday, George. Butterfat was 465, protein was
yeah,
367. I looked at another group this morning just to see how that was there at 480 butterfat, and proteins of 378, I think,
yeah.
was the average. So there's probably more crossbred in that second group than there is in the
Okay,
first group. And look, again, it is early days in lactation, so
okay,
those figures will probably drop now as cows get going.
okay. Tell us about grazing then. What's typically grazed and what's being grazed this year as a
Yeah,
proportion?
so you heard John outline the typical spring grazing planner, right? So again, in Kerry, we are a little bit different because our calving pattern is a bit different. So what we do, George, is we adjust it depending on whether. So I'll give you kind of two ideas of what we do. So the guys on the dryer farms will be calving maybe the 8th of February. So our aim is to have 30% grazed on those farms on the 7th of March. We're a week later again with the 65%, like John said, he's aiming for Paddy's Day. We're aiming for 24th of March. And then we're aiming for starting second rotation 10th to 12th of April on the drier ones. On the heavier farms, then we're a little bit back from that. But this year has been exceptional because of the dry weather in February. So even those farms who would normally have maybe 1 or 2% normally grazed are up on 10, 12, 14% graze currently.
Yeah,
So they're, and again, look, what they're doing is they're adjusting the plan based on the year that's in front of them.
yeah,
Like many of these guys will say, look, you might get a week on Paddy's week where
exactly.
they're in sight for the week,
That's
and that
it.
happens, and that's fine. That'll be an adjustment, but they work off the budget as well, George. They work on that spring rotation plan and have the budget going at the same time, just to see where they are and whether they need to pull the handbrake up or not.
Yeah,
Oftentimes on the heavier farms, you won't get through the first rotation. You're into the
yeah.
second rotation, and there's paddocks cut off
It's a
because
couple
of
on
ground
graze then
conditions.
they get mowed
Yeah,
out probably. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Very
yeah,
good. So look, at things sound like you're kind of a week ahead of yourselves down in Kerry in terms of grazing, which is great.
yeah.
And I think my principle is always smash and grab. If you have it, you just use it. And look, you can worry about a wet week after. You can always bring them in if you have to. But stuff is grazed is coming back.
Yeah, it is, George. And look, what some of the lads will say is, look, they've gotten a huge response this year to the slurry that was applied in late January, early February, and the 20 units of nitrogen that went on in early February.
February, yeah.
We're close to getting, with the grass group yesterday, we're close to getting double-digit growths in the group, which normally we wouldn't see until after Paddy's Day. So look, that's fantastic. But soil temperature has been the key driver of that, George. Like we've a soil temperature for February here 2.5 degrees above normal, which is more like an April soil temperature than it has been a February one.
That's fantastic. Great to hear. Everyone deserves a break. Tell us then about breeding and what the plans are. That's the other thing I want to talk to you about, Dennis.
Yeah, so look, we were talking off air, George. Look, I would have a good share of guys who I would consider early innovators, and they've been doing sex semen with a number of years. But I'm finding that there's even more than the early innovators doing it now at this stage, George. Look, they're skewing the figures in their favor because they're doing a pre-scan on the herd of cows. They might have 60 cows that they want to breed to dairy. And there might be 10, 15 of those that the vet is saying to them, look, they're not for sex semen or whatever. So they're getting very, very good results with the sex semen. Like we were saying off air, with like there's 3 very active AI companies in our area. They're all have good selection available. Whereas maybe 4 or 5 years ago, you might have had a limit on maybe 0.14 protein bulls. Now you have the 0.22 bulls, the 0.24 bulls are all sexed as well. So look, that's a big help in terms of what the customer is demanding and what farmers are using.
And what about the beef side of the house then? Are there trends coming in beef AI as well, or beef breeding?
Yeah, so look, what I'm seeing with guys, George, and even more so with the last 2 years is there's a lot of guys looking at the herd of cows. They're starting to get a stable herd, and they're saying, look, there's I can get the heifers that I want with sex semen off of the best 50% of the herd. There's cows there that are going to come in early in the breeding season, and they're deciding, look, that they're a generation behind the other cows in the herd. So why breed them to dairy? They're breeding them to beef. They're using high DBI bulls, and they're very happy with the results. Now, look, they just need to be a little bit careful in terms of you can go a little bit far with the thing as well. But calving ease, good beef value bull, short gestation, like you were saying yourself, they are all the important key ones to it, George. And the big thing for dairy farmers to remember, look, the vast majority of our money comes from the dairy cow. So we want a cow fit and in the parlour. We want long gestation or long days in milk, and short gestation, and high fats and proteins. That's what guys are breeding for, and they're doing a fantastic job in terms of achieving that.
Dennis, I want to bring you back to one. Before we finish that, it sounds like you're an advocate at this stage of judicious use of sex semen as a kind of a game changer for your farmers. That be right?
It is, but look, it's to follow the rules around it, George. So guys are following the protocols. They're having quite good results. Now there are 1 or 2 that you hear that don't, and when you actually go investigating it, there's maybe something missing in the protocol, something missing in the steps. And that's where the fall down is. It's not the sex semen piece. Yes, they're 90% sex semen, so there will be a bull calf in the mix here and there as well. But guys that are doing it and guys that have a number of years under their belt are very, very happy with it, George, from what I hear anyway.
Very good. Great. We'll leave it at that piece of that. The last thing I want to cover with you, Dennis, is a bit about silage. So you have some interesting comments about silage. So first of all, there's loads of silage around. That's the first thing.
I won't say loads. There is plenty though, George. We did not suffer the same as other areas. Now, I have 1 or 2 farmers who'll shoot me for saying that because their farms did suffer, and just because of the nature of what their farms are. But
now you're suffering. You're talking about the dry last summer, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So there was some silage fed on those farms to build covers in the autumn, we'll say, and there was some silage fed on those farms to cover shortage of grass at that time, but not to the same extent as was in other parts of the country. So there is good bank of silage in an awful lot of yards around here. So what guys are looking at is they're looking at doing multi-cut systems to maybe get better quality silage. And there's some red clover gone into outside blocks down here as well last year. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. There's a bit of nervousness about that, George, in terms of will we get the 2 dry days together in the lead up to cutting when we cut that so that it wilts properly, so we get the preservation right. And we had a very wet back end down here last year, so September, October, November were very wet, and some of what was planned to be cut at the end of September didn't get cut. Some guys got back out and grazed that with young stock in the month of December when we had the frost. And that does look to have recovered reasonably well. Now, given the warm soil temperatures we've had in February have probably helped that ground to recover, but there will be some concerns around it, George. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. But it's a wait and see in terms of what happens in the coming months and years on the red clover. I see huge potential for our country anyway as well. Denis, question in there. Do you see a role for contract breeding of replacement heifers? In other words, maybe someone has a low enough kind of merit herd, genetic merit herd, puts everything to beef, and then someone else maybe with better herd putting maybe using sex a bit more widely in the herd.
I would be an advocate of it because I would have guys who have will say it's like if you put a straw into a cow today, right? You have a calf next spring, well, not today, but in May. You've a calf next spring. You've a bulling heifer 12 months later. You have a calved heifer the year after. You probably 2 years before she's influencing the tank very much. So you're kind of a 5-year process. So it's very hard to breed up low production cows, right? So there are plenty of really good herds out there who have excellent genetics. They've been doing this with 20, 30, 40 years. And you're always going to be a generation or two behind them if you have low genetic merit cows. So I think there is a role for it, George. It is a slow one to take off because guys like to breed their own heifers. They like their own stock. There are big fears in terms of bringing in disease. So I would say have a good conversation with the vet in terms of what protocols to follow if you are going that route. But like there are a few guys down here who have done it. Even my colleague Nora there had one guy who did it. First 3 years he was feeling, Jesus, are these better than what they are at all? And in the last 2 years his performance has just gone straight up, George. Like he's jumped 30, 40 kilos. And it's because the daughters of these animals are now coming through as well. So he's delighted with it. And I know that time when Nora was trying to sell it to him, it was a hard sell to buy into it. But look, I think it has a role. Yeah.
Come on, thanks, Denis. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call it quits here now. At that, we're going to thank Denis Brassil from the Tralee office there for joining us, the Tralee Teagasc office, for joining us this morning to discuss the kind of Kerry take on spring 2023. Thanks very much, Denis, and look, we'll talk to you sometime in the future again.
Thanks, George. Take care. Bye.
We're back again next week, guys, and girls. We're back again next week with Don Crowley to talk about keeping it under 100,000 in the spring of 2023. God bless now, and safe farming.